Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel Software Testing. My name is Daniel Knott and I'm happy that you're here again. In today's video I would like to talk about my mobile testing cheat sheet that I created when I was working as a mobile tester in an agile software development team. I created this cheat sheet to help other people, reminding all the topics that you need to cover as a mobile tester during your sprint or during your testing activities. It's basically a big mind map that I've created to remind you on certain things that you have to do as a mobile tester. And let's take a look. Let's jump right into the mobile testing cheat sheet. Enjoy. So let's start from the very first topic. It's the camera. Whenever you have an app that uses the camera, you should actually keep in mind that you should test for different vendors on the market. If it's on iOS side, you also have to test on different iPhone versions or on iPad versions. Because there are different resolution camera installed. There are cameras with high resolutions, low resolutions, and you also have to see if you're using the flashlight, that may change your testing activities. So whenever you use your camera, keep these topics in mind. Third-party system apps, yeah, that's a nice topic and an important one, because, for example, install a new keyboard app. When I have done this in the past, I found so many bugs in our production app because there are different apps that you can use in order to replace the system keyboard, and those keyboard apps have a different height, a different size, and everything like that, and this could impact your app on the test. So, for example, see that a third-party keyboard app is working with your app, is not blocking any UI elements or anything like that. At the same time, if your app is using a calendar or a calendar export, also try to install third-party calendar apps to see how this is going to work. And this is basically everything that you need to do whenever you have like third-party apps that are replacing system or native apps that come pre-installed with your device and on the operating system. It's also sometimes helpful if you install other system launchers on Android, because also users tend to do that, to change the system launcher to see how your app behaves with a different launcher. Let's come to the next topic. Oh yes, that's an important one. It's called security, right? Security testing is also important for mobile testers, and especially for mobile apps, because we also have access to critical data or sensitive data, or we have a communication usually to a backend server. So we must ensure that the requests and responses are encrypted and that everything is secure. And what can you do? First of all, I highly recommend to talk to experts, because security testing is really a difficult and complicated topic. You can keep the security topic in mind when you have a login, for example, when you work with certificates, when you're using cookies or you're handling passwords in your app. So then security is a big and important topic. Also, device settings play a role in security, so make sure that you don't store any sensitive data on the phone or in any not encrypted way. A good starting point where you can take a look is the OWASP Mobile Security Project. They have like a really nice overview of potential security topics that you have to cover as a mobile tester. So keep this in mind. Beta testing. Yeah, that's also a great idea. Whenever you have an app that's already being released, or you have like lots of colleagues in your company, beta testing might help you to get a really first impression of the app that you have developed. And you can pretty much start with your team. For example, say that nobody in the team is using the production version, but is using the nightly builds from the CI system to use this app version. Then if this is going to work, you get like early feedback from within your team. You can then, for example, extend this to your company. So let's say you have like 300, 400 or even thousands of colleagues in your company. Try to set up a distribution system, and that every employee in the company has to use actually the beta app. And then you get like really nice feedback. You can add some entry in the system settings, for example, that they can report a bug. For example, when they shake the device, they can send you a bug report with screenshots and with handwritings. This might help you in order to get a better app out there. Then if this is already established within your company, I can also recommend you to invite customers to the beta testing group. This can be done in a really easy and fashion way with for example, on the Android side with a Google Play Store. You could just enable your app for beta testing, and then people can download a pre-release version as well. And then you have like a public beta testing group as well. So you can also invite people and then send them a new distributed beta build via, for example, Test Flight App Center or any other tool that is out there in order to have the beta app installed on those devices. Yes, as I already said, there are like some use app distribution tools that are out there. So there's Crashlytics, there's Hockey App, there's Test Flight. You can use the Play Store stage rollout, and you have the App Center as well from Microsoft that can be used in order to distribute beta builds to your customers. And I highly recommend you to do that because you get usually pretty much really good feedback from in an early development stage, and that feedback will help you to get the app in a much better state and to have less bugs in front of users. So what is the next topic? Yeah, test automation is also, it's usually a hot topic. It's something that I put into my cheat sheet because it's usually done from a wrong perspective. Whenever I talk to people, test automation, being it mobile or being it web, they just want to automate everything and to really think in a really bigger picture. I usually recommend to start simple, and this is also for mobile. Start simple and focus on things that matters to you. Focus on the things that have the high impact on your customers and also high impact on your business. And when you start simple, of course, you can use different tools on different layers. For unit tests, you can use Roboelectric, XC-Test, for example, and there are more other tools out there that you can use. You can use also API for writing API tests. You can use Postman, for example, or Charles Proxy in order to execute some tests against your API or to check the responses out there. And then from a UI perspective, you can use tools such as Keep It Functional, Appium, Espresso, XUI Test, and there's a couple of more out there that you can explore and see which one fits best to your development and test environment. And as I said, start simple, start evaluate a bit of the tools, see which tool fits best into your development environment. Error handling. Whenever you have error handling in your app, I bet every app has error handling in the app out there. Make sure that you check that the errors are translated in the languages that you provide, because it's not a nice experience if you have an app, for example, in English, but the error is being shown in for example, in German or in the German language. The error should be meaningful, and with meaningful, I mean there should be which goes to the next point. They should be helpful. Actually, they should help the user to solve the error, to solve the problem, give retry options, and give meaningful information that the user know what he or she has been done wrong in order to get better the next time. Browsers. What is with browsers? Whenever you have your app that is not a native app or full native app, it might be the case that you use some native browsers or some web pages inside your app, or even you have like a responsive web app out there that's being used on the mobile browsers. You should actually do a mobile browser creating with ABC groups. What's behind the ABC groups? I will make another video in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned. And what's this all about? You should also check, of course, all the native browsers that come pre-installed on the operating system, being it Apple, Safari, or on Android, it's usually Chrome or the Samsung browser. Then, if possible, you should also use and install other browsers and see how those browsers behave with the application under test. But also make sure that you test on only those browsers your customers are using, because it doesn't make any sense to test on, let's say, Chrome on iOS if you don't have any Chrome users on iOS. And then also, whenever you have the browsers up and running, keep the different browser engines in mind, that we have different browser engines that render the web elements in a different way, and this can lead to weird behaviors or wrong behavior actually. Accessibility testing, that's an important one as well. So keep also accessibility topics in mind. So there are different kinds of impairments out there. So you could test for visual impairment, you can check for audible impairment things, for physical impairment or cognitive impairment topics. This is actually a really complicated and but important topic. I have there like a chapter in my book, Hands-on Mobile App Testing, about the accessibility testing for mobile apps. As a starting point, for example, you can change the contrast on your mobile device, and see how the colors of your app will change, and if it's still readable, for example, or you can use a screen reader that is actually reading out what the screen reader sees on the app. And this could also be like a first indicator if you have done some accessibility topics or not. But also on this topic, I highly recommend to get help of an expert, because this is something really tricky and really also important, but difficult to implement at some point. So let's go to the other side. What do we have? Interrupt testing. Yeah, that's also really important. So interrupts. So what's an interrupt? So basically it's whenever you have your app up and running and you get any kind of push notification or a call is coming in. So whenever you test your app, get another phone and just call the phone while your app is active and see how the app reacts. Is it going to the background? Is it keeping the current state of the UI, of the data? Then stop the call and see if how the app reacts on that interrupt. You can generate interrupts, like for example with Android you can use the monkey tool. I made a video already on this topic where you can use the monkey run on Android to just send some pseudo-random comments to your app and see how the app reacts on this. On iOS side we have also a similar tool, it's called UI Auto Monkey. We have Dixie and we have Crash Monkey. Take a look at the tools if they're still maintained and available, and use them if you think they're beneficial for you. Another interrupt can be sending a message to the device to generate push notifications, or to set an alarm clock while testing, and be creative with an interrupt, because also clicking the power button, for example, is an interrupt by its own, or clicking the volume up and down button is an interrupt already, and see how the app under test is reacting to this one. What else do we have? Permissions. Yes, so permissions. Every app these days have permissions. They have access, or they want access to your photo library, to your microphone, to your location, to any kind of things that the device and the operating system is offering. And you should also check for those permissions, right? So to grant the permissions, revoke the permissions, deny the permissions, and see how the app behaves in that. If there's like a nice user flow implemented, that the user always know how to enable the permission or disable the permission again. But at the very beginning, you should also ask yourself, is this permission really necessary? You should talk to your developer or to your product manager if we really need access to the microphone, if we have nothing to do with the microphone. So, because this also adds trust to your app. Because users that don't like to add too many permissions to an app because they think they're getting spied, or it's like too many information getting exposed. So keep this in mind. Less is better than too many permissions used in your app. Standby testing is also something that you could check while doing the mobile testing part. So put the device in standby mode, just click the power button and the device goes into sleep or power standby mode. Then wake up the device again to see how the app is actually working with that situation. It goes hand in hand also with interrupt testing. You could also leave the device untouched for a certain number of times, so you can set the screen timeout or the standby timeout on your device to, let's say, 10 seconds or 30 seconds, and then leave the device there. And then wait until the standby is going to happen, and then wake the device up again and see if the app is back at the same state. Is the data still the same? Is the UI state still the same? And so forth. And what I usually do is I put the device, for example, when I went home after work, I installed the app, I logged into the app, and then I left the app open, but putting the device in standby mode. And then the next day I was checking, hey, what's going on there? Is it in the same state that I wished for? Or is it doing like a new refresh, fetching new data from the backend and so forth, to see how the app is reacting on this. Log files, yeah, that's also important, right? This is usually something really useful, log files. So whenever you test your app, you should connect the device to your development environment and see what's going on the logs, because there can be errors, there can be warnings, and this is something that you should look for. And this information you should directly pass to the developer and say, hey, let's talk about this. Is there an error? Do we have an issue here? Because it might cause potential bugs on the production system or in the wild when your users are using the app. And of course, it should be like one of the last things you should do before going live, check the log files one more time. Also on the release candidate, to be sure that nothing is going to happen in a really weird situation when, I don't know, putting the device in standby, doing some random usage and see that the app is still working and is not showing any errors here. At the same time, you should also check the log files for sensitive data, so that API responses are encrypted, that nothing has been stored that should not be stored, and so forth. The next topic is time and date. Yeah, whenever you use a time format or a date format within your app, you should change the device country settings, for example, to US time format, so like it's month, day, year, not like day, month, year, and see how the app is reacting. For example, also change the time to the future, see how the app is handling this. Do you also have a server time or a local time, and see that there is a synchronization happening. Put the device into the past, into the date into the past, and see how the app is reacting. I've seen funny things when putting the device into the future. So it was easy to, for example, for some gaming apps to overcome the waiting time. Sometimes in gaming apps you have to wait, I don't know, an hour or two until you can continue. I just moved the time 2 hours onwards, and then I was able to play again. So these kind of things you should keep in mind. And also time zones. This is also something you should keep in mind whenever working with time zones in your app. This can lead to really funny errors and weird situations. And one thing that's coming to my mind is also leap year. So for example, the 29th of February, these kind of things. And leap years, this is something that you should keep in mind whenever you work with time and date and is part of your app. So let's go to sensors. This is like a bigger topic. As you can see, there's like a lot of sensors installed on a mobile device these days. You have the ambient light sensor. So this is, you should test the app under test in different light situations, being it outdoor or indoor. You have different light situations and see that the ambient light sensor is working, has no impact to your app. Same for the proximity sensor, using different surfaces like a glass, a mirror, your face, your hand, a table or something like that. Put it in the near to the device and see that the device is handling this situation. And if your app is also using this sensor, you should keep different scenarios in mind. Acceleration sensor, so you can change the orientation of your device from portrait to landscape multiple times to see how the app is handling this. If it's supported landscape mode, you can find some funny bugs. I did this like, I don't know, 10-20 times, and then while the app was running, for example, and I found out that the loading spinner was not around anymore. It was like ellipsy because of the rotation thingy, because there was some miscalculation going on. Also change from landscape to landscape. This is something you could just check with the acceleration sensor, or you can do a run, for example. You just quickly move, stop, and see how if it has an impact on your app if you are using the sensor. You have the gyroscope sensor, so you have the 6-axis support that you can take a look at to see how it's going to happen. We have a magnetic sensor that you can check how it behaves in the indoor and in the outdoor environment, and also test, for example, next to lots of metal, because this has an impact on the magnetic or GPS sensor here, to impact the data, the finding of the current location, or in any kind of way the direction, for example. If you have an app that uses pressure, temperature, or humidity sensors, you should definitely test in different locations, right? This is nothing you should do in the office environment. You have to go out and test in the wild, in the correct situation. So, for example, using in sports activity app, go out and test in different situations and scenarios, because that's where the fun part is going to happen. Also location and magnetic is somehow connected here. It's a location sensor, I mean GPS. You can do the indoor testing, see if the GPS signal is getting found. If not, how is the app reacting to this? The same on the outdoor situation. Go to the city center, for example. It's pretty hard to get a GPS signal. You can go to the countryside if you find a signal there. And you should also test the app depending on the location, as I said, like on a mountain, in a valley, and these kind of things. There's some mobile phones also have a touchless sensor, so you can wave in front of the device to do some actions. This is also something you should keep in mind. I highly recommend to actually take a look at your app and talk to the developer, talk to your product manager, which kind of sensor you are using within your app and you want to use, and then just cross out the things that you think are helpful for you, because you don't need to test for a magnetic sensor if you don't use this, right? So it's just a cheat sheet that you have it in mind to think about and to talk about with your team. Mobile networks, yeah, that's definitely something we should test with, because as the name a mobile app suggests, it's users are on the go. They're using the app somewhere outside, indoors, in different situations, and they have different mobile network connections. And if your app relies on a stable internet connection from the phone to a backend system, this is something you should test, right? So you have to check in different mobile network speeds. So you have the LTE 5G network, 4G, 5G now, 3G, Edge, GPRS, so really in slow internet connections, to see if the app is responding. If the request takes too much time, for example, there should be a nice error message coming out saying, hey, timeout or whatever, please try again later, or your internet connection is too slow to process this request. Of course, you should test in Wi-Fi with a really nice internet connection. You should also check in the play mode. So put the device in play mode and see how the app is reacting. Do we get nice error messages and these kind of things? But also remove the SIM card, for example. This could also have an impact on the app under test. And what I usually suggest is like to go out of the office and test in the wild. Again, depending on your app, test in different scenarios with different mobile networks. And maybe also get some data, some customer user data, to see where in which mobile networks your customers are using the app and what they are doing and where they're doing this. And this is pretty helpful. So what's next? The battery. What's needed? You should keep in mind when we're talking about battery. Yeah, you should test with a battery 100%, right? So just have your test devices charged. It's pretty helpful, but nothing should happen. Everything should work. The fun part starts when you have like a low battery. So for example, something below 10%, because most of the devices, they switch off hardware functionality like vibration, GPS. They trim down the display screen to like a lower not resolution, but brightness. And this might have an impact to your app. And this is something you should test. What I also usually do is every couple of minutes, let's say 5 minutes, I note down the battery state. So I start with 100%, and then after 5 minutes, I note down the battery state to see if we have like a battery drainage, for example. Or if it's much more precise, you can also use profiling tools within your IDE to see if the battery consumption is too high. But it's also recommended to check the battery settings apps on Android or iOS, where you can see if your app is using a lot of battery. And this is not cool because users hate that if your app on a test drains battery. Local storage, what can you do here? So if your device or if your app is saving information on the phone, you could check what happens if the device has no storage left. Is the app still able to process something? Is it showing a nice error message? So you can test with a full local storage, with a nearly full, so that you reach the complete capacity of your storage. With an empty storage, or even with an SD card storage, is your app able, especially on Android, to move the data to an SD card, to have like an external storage? This should be supported as well, because this is also a really nice feature that Android offers. Install and uninstall and update testing is also something that I really like to do, is I uninstall the app and then I check if there's data left on the phone, for example. Or I perform an update test from an older app version to a newer one to see how the app behaves on that. Is the user, for example, still logged in? Is the app in the same state? Is my data still there? And these kind of things. There are tools that you can use, for example, with ADB. You can use ADB install -r to test the update process, or you can use the Apple configurator tool, or you can use also the Xcode tool to perform an update test here. Devices, of course, also something you should keep in mind. First of all, you should only test on the devices that your users are using and the customers are using, because that's the main focus, right? You can check some tracking information if you have tracking in your app implemented, what kind of devices your customers are using. Use this data and then test against those devices only. You can use, for example, only the latest devices, depending on your peer group. You can use old devices, but they're still supported, but they're not that powerful anymore. And with that, all this information, you can also create a nice mobile device group, also ABC group. Maybe we'll also record another video on that topic, what the grouping is all about. This is also helpful to target down your test devices, to narrow down the test devices to a handful of devices that you have to test on, because on Android, for example, you have more than, I think, 30 or more thousand of different Android devices on the market. You cannot test on all of them. And even on iOS, you have fragmentation. Looking at all the iOS devices out there with the different OS versions, it's still a topic there as well. And then, especially also on Android, you should keep in mind that you have different vendors with different UI user interfaces. So you have a stock or vanilla Android, you have the Samsung interface, HTC, Sony, and so forth. And they all put a different user interface on top of it. And this might have an impact to your testing as well. Yeah, screen sizes is also something you should keep in mind. Test on big screens, test on small screen, test on a Retina or a HD resolution device. Use also devices with a really small screen. Tablets is something you could test on, or smartwatches, for example, if you have a smartwatch app, so and that supports the smallest screen possible. You should keep this in mind. But also the screen sizes is really tightly connected to the devices itself. You should get some user data and then test accordingly what is being used by your customers. Operating system versions, the same thing. You should test only on the supported operating system versions, right? So check the customer data, what OS version is being used by your customers. Use the device grading that I already mentioned to narrow down the test devices and the test setup configuration, so the hardware and software configuration, and just test on those things, right? Don't keep the old stuff in mind. And maybe you and your team, you can also define like a minimum required version, and below that you don't do any testing activities, because you may have only a handful of users and you know that they could update to a new operating system version because it's offered, but they're just not doing it. And this is something you could then say, okay, make a communication to the users, tell them, hey, please go and update because we don't support this operating system version anymore. Please upgrade to a new version, and then they're good to go. Databases, yeah, of course, if your app uses using a local database, check that it has no impact on existing data. Check for database migration. So whenever you have a database migration or an update from a breaking change, for example, make sure that the database migration is being tested and is working, and the data that is consistent, right? So check the local data, and if it's also sent to the backend, see that this data is always consistent and it's not being corrupted on both sides or on any other side. Okay, what else do we have? Coming almost to an end. We have languages. Of course, you have to test your app in different languages. Test the app in the languages that you support. Talk to your product manager, developers, which languages are supported, and then only test on those languages. You can try out and test the app on a not supported language to see if you have a default language predefined, but this is something you should keep in mind. And if you cannot read the text that you see in a different language, you might get some help from an external agency or from another person that is able to speak this language. Or maybe crowd testing is helping out here as well. Notifications you should keep in mind. So there can be local notifications on the device itself triggered by the app or by a push backend, for example. You should keep an eye on that users can enable or disable the notifications, what the app is doing here. You should check for the visual, the sound, and the vibration themes that the app can perform on the device, because it's not so nice if the vibration is not stopping, for example, or the sound is not stopping, or it's just too loud and it's overwriting something. You can also check the notifications on the lock screen and within the notification center. What's going to happen there? Is there an instant reply, for example? Are you able to use all the actions that are provided by the operating system, and all these kind of things? Usability. yeah, always it's one of the biggest topics that you should keep in mind is usability. This is not only for mobile apps, it's for basically for every software product out there. It should be usable. Features should be easy to use. One-hand usage is one topic you should keep in mind so that you can use maybe all the features with one hand. That the tappable areas are big enough, so sometimes the tappable area is just too small and it's really hard to reach to the point. This is something you should address and to bring it to the standard, for example, or to talk to developers and product manager that they will increase the tappable area. Also important to know the platform guidelines that are being offered by Google and Apple. You should read them, follow them, and because this is something that users expect. They expect to have an app that is following the usability guidelines by the platforms, and if not, it will lead to bad reviews. The KIFSU principle, what this is all about, I will also record another video. It stands for keep it fast, simple and usable. That's the principle that I created when working with mobile apps, and it's pretty much really helpful to keep exactly this in mind so that an app is fast, simple and usable. And this is something you should always keep in mind when doing your testing activities. Tracking. Yeah, if tracking is in place, of course, make sure that everything is working before release, because it's nothing more critical for a company. If, for example, you have an app release, you go out and then you find out that the tracking is not working anymore, so you're more or less blind on the usage data, on new features. You cannot make some decisions based on the tracking. So this is really important to check. You can use, for example, Charles Proxy or Fiddler or any other proxy tool to check that the tracking is being implemented and correct. You can do some simple performance tests. So you can compare, for example, the current live version with the new release version. Have it hand in hand next to each other. Maybe you should have the exact same devices with some exact same hardware configuration, and then just do some performance checkups on the app itself. See if the scrolling is still smooth, the responsiveness is still there, and these kind of things. Because performance testing on mobile apps is not easy. It's also something that you can do together with the developer, also with some IDE tools or supported tools that are available on both platforms, iOS and Android. But at the same time, you must ensure that the API is fast enough, also from a backend perspective, that the backend system is performant enough to actually handle lots of requests and responses at the same time. So it's a multiple layer performance test that you should start in your company and within your team. In-app purchase. Yes, of course, you should test it before every release, because that's where the money comes in, right? If you're using in-app purchases, you should do that. You should test it. And the vendors, they're providing usually some sandboxing systems where you can test also the in-app purchase on a sandbox device or a staging system to not charge like real money on your credit cards, for example. Consistency. Yeah, check the app state with the backend system state so that everything is in sync. Or for example, if you have a web application in a browser on a desktop system, and at the same time you have a native app, check that the data that you enter into the mobile app is also available on the web platform, that is almost instantly available, and that the data is always in sync. That's also important. App data. Yeah, you can use the app data, or the app is using some app data. So you should clear the app data and see how the app is handling the situation. You can also spam your app with lots of data, like enter a lot of inputs in your app, save many things and see how the app reacts. And also, especially if you clear caches or clear the app data, what's going to happen with it. If it's crashing or if it's showing any error messages. Multitasks. It's also something that you should check, just that your app is supporting the multitask implementation of the operating systems. So you could close the app, put it to background, bring it to foreground, do this multiple times, open the app via multitask, for example, and do this several times in parallel on the device and see how the app is reacting. Also put the app into the background, for example, switch the app or the device off, turn it on again, see that the app is back in the background functionality. And at the same time, you should also check that the app in background is not consuming too much data and not too much battery, because this is also something users really hate. Let's get to gestures. So what do we have? We have lots and lots of multiple gestures, and this is also the last topic from my cheat sheet. So as you know, we have like a multi-touch display on the modern devices these days. So you have the touch, the single touch on the screen, you have the long touch, you have the swipe, you have the tap, you have the double tap, you have to drag to move around things, you have the multi-touch, the pinch to zoom, pinch to close, you have to rotate, you have sometimes even, you have 3 or 4 finger gestures that you can perform, especially on tablets. And all these kind of things you should keep in mind when you have an app. And also you should talk to your product manager, to your developer, which of those gestures are supported and lead to a change in the UI and lead to change in a data processing point of view. And then you should test accordingly, because you can also find funny things while using multiple fingers at the same time on the screen, for example. Yes, and that's actually the last topic from my cheat sheet. I will zoom out a bit just to give you an idea that there's actually a lot of things that you could think of before every release or within your development department. Of course, this is nothing you should do on every release, because this takes just too much time to test on every release, but it should give you an idea what can be done. So in case you have spare time in a sprint or in your workflow, you can pick, for example, sensors. You make a sensor tour, or you do the gesture tour, and then you test accordingly with a specific that idea in mind. What I have done also in the past is I printed out a cheat sheet and put it into the development space, so that also developers were walking by, just looking on the cheat sheet to keep things in mind, also already during the development phase. And the cool thing is, I will also link this PDF in the video description, so you can download the PDF for free to use it in your team. And I would be happy to get some feedback on the cheat sheet from you. What do you think about it? Do you think there's something missing? Would you like to extend it? That would be nice. Leave me a comment. And also it would be nice if you subscribe to my channel. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Have a nice day, and bye bye.